Hi, and welcome to Parashat Emor. And in the first sentence, there's a very bizarre command that Moshe has to instruct Aaron and his sons, and that is that they should not be contaminated by the dead. As it says, "Lenefesh lo itama be'amav," amongst his people. And it's very strange for a number of reasons. Firstly, we already know, we've been told that we shouldn't impurify ourselves generally, the whole of the Jewish people. Why now repeat it to the Kohanim? And what is it about being in the same space as the dead person that makes you, the living person, impure? That doesn't happen with animals. When an animal dies, sure, if you touch the animal, the impurity is transferred to you. But if the animal is in the same room, it doesn't transfer to you. Only with a human. Why is it different? And the difference is that when God created man, he was never meant to die. He was supposed to live forever. We were supposed to live forever. And it's only from the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil that the impurity of the snake, so to speak, was contaminated within the bloodstream of the human. And that produced the result that human beings became mortal. But let's understand how that works, because we know that the human being is a mixture between a body and a soul. And the soul is pure, so how can the soul become impure as a result of a physical proximity? So we have to understand that the lowest level of the soul is the nefesh. The nefesh resides in the blood. And when Adam ate from the tree and injected within him, as a result, the impurity of the snake, that impurity not only penetrated the body, but it also penetrated the lowest part of the soul, namely the nefesh. And we have a situation where the nefesh can only then finally be purified by removing itself from the body, and that happens in the next world, and the final purification takes place. But God in His mercy also gave us the opportunity to gradually reduce and remove ourselves from that impurity from the time of Abraham, right in time until the time of Matan Sinai. We were in stages gradually reducing the intensity of that impurity until we were able to stand in Mount Sinai and were elevated to the pre-Adam sin state of getting rid of the impurity completely. And the incident of the golden calf reintroduced that to us, and therefore mortality came back yet again. So only after the soul completely removes itself from the body through death can the soul purify itself back to the original state it was before eating of the tree. And when a person passes away, the part of the person that we are mourning is the nefesh, because it's that part of the soul that was contaminated by the impurities of the body. And it is by moving to the next world that contamination can be completely removed again. The purity of the state before the sin is regained. And what happens is that when someone passes away, a vacuum of spirituality that's left as a result of the nefesh being removed from the body means that the negative spiritual energies around attract to it like a magnet and use it as a base to infuse their impurity on others. And that's why being in the same room as somebody who's passed away can contaminate us spiritually. What's interesting for me in this idea is that the reverse must also be true, and that is when you are in the presence of a sage, where his nefesh and soul and neshama is oozing outside of him. His influence, his presence can influence you in a positive way, either in terms of healing you or realigning your soul, adjusting something within your soul. Energies extend beyond the physical body is something that's quite fascinating to me. But this all begs the question, and that is that we learned earlier that we, the Jewish people, are likened to one soul, one nefesh. If that's the case, then why would there be different laws for the Kohanim with regards to impurity to the regular Bnei Israel? Surely we're all under the same umbrella. To understand this, we have to understand that God, in His infinite wisdom, decided to, after 2,000 years of trying to encourage mankind to become holy and pure, He decided that the best way forward is to take one small sect of people, namely the children of Avram and his children, and elevate them to a state of purity and closeness to Him, in the hope that that closeness will spill over to the rest of humanity, that we, the Jewish people, should become a light to the nations as a result of that. And even within the Jewish nation, there is a similar thing happening with regards to the Kohanim. And that is that the Kohanim have been elevated to a state of serving God in the temple, dealing with His sacrifices, spiritual korbanot to Hashem. And that proximity and working for Hashem means that they have to be extra careful in terms of retaining their purity, much more so than a regular Jewish person. I guess you could liken it to somebody working in a nuclear plant would have to have much more precautions than somebody working in a factory, masks and suits and armor and everything, to make sure that the high intensity energy does not consume the people working there. In verse 2 and 3 of chapter 21, we're told the exceptions to the rule for the Kohen. In other words, he's allowed to contaminate himself for the burial of several close relatives, namely his wife, his mother, his father, his brother, his sister, his son, his daughter, his brother, his sister. Why are these exceptions? The first exception is his wife, and we know the saying that Eshet kegufo, his wife is like his own flesh, and we know from Bereshit chapter 2, verse 24, that the man leaves his parental home when he gets married to his wife, and he clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. How do they become one flesh? Through the joint children that they have together. And that's why Adam called his wife Isha, because they were basically two faces made from one soul, one nefesh. And that is why it's an exception. The second level of exemption is his mother and father. It says le'imo ul aviv. It doesn't have ve le'imo. The vav is missing there because it's a different level of family closeness than your wife. Wife is the closest. Why is the mother mentioned first? Because we learned in Parashat Israel that when a mother conceives of a boy, that the male child was a result of the mother activating her genes first, and that's why she's mentioned first here. And then we have the son and his daughter because they are extensions of him, obviously. And then finally we have this brother and his sister. The sister is only exempt if she's unmarried, because once she's married, her closeness is attached to her husband as opposed to her parental source. And verse 5 and 6 have further instructions of not allowing the Kohen to mourn by shaving off parts of his hair or parts of his beard, the sides of his beard, or cutting himself as a sign of mourning. Why? Because he has to remain pure, because he is serving Hashem, serving the sacrificial food, and as a result of that, he must not contaminate himself through mourning, because mourning is affiliating yourself with the deceased, and the Kohen must be aware that his affiliation should only be exclusively to God, which really is a very high demanding reality for them. And the Alshech says that there's two reasons that the Kohen is a Kohen. First, hereditary, and secondly, that the Kohen was the one involved in eating, in preparing the sacrificial animals as a korban to Hashem. And he says, don't be jealous of the Kohen, because the majority of the reason for his purity and his laws to maintain his purity is because his work for in the temple, and don't be jealous of him, because with that closeness to God comes extra responsibility and extra restrictions. For example, there's a restrictions to who a Kohen can marry, and we know today, if you're a more mature Kohen, the spectrum of people that you're allowed to marry is much, much smaller than a regular person. And so don't be jealous of the Kohen. He's not allowed to have any property. He's not allowed to be involved in the materialism of the world from that perspective, because he has to dedicate himself to God. And we can't all be at that level. That's why a certain few were selected to become that. And it was always like that, because the person in charge of serving God was always the Bechor, the firstborn. And as a result of the sin of the golden calf, that was shifted to the tribe of Levi. And in the same way that the Jewish people appointed Moshe to have the front of face-to-face connection with God, because it was just too intense for us to live at that level. We weren't able to sustain that level of kedusha, purity, and holiness. And the same level, the same way, we are actually appointing the Kohen to represent us when dealing with the sacrificial process, and which needs that extra diligence and carefulness, which we can't always maintain. And the Alshech suggests that nowadays we don't have the temple, so the scholar who honors Hashem is likened to the priest who used to serve in the temple. And finally, let's look at verse 8, which is fascinating. It says the following: "You will sanctify him, the Kohen, for he offers the food of your God. He shall remain holy to you, for holy am I, Hashem, who sanctifies you." And it's a very bizarre structure of a verse, because he's offering the food to your God. He's become our messenger to God. He remains holy to you. That means that we should maintain a level of respect and holiness and sanctity. We should maintain a level of honor to the Kohen because of his proximity to his work with God. The most interesting thing is this conclusion: who sanctifies you? Surely it be Hashem who sanctifies the Kohen. He's the one that we should be sanctifying. But the Alshech says a beautiful thing, and that is that by sanctifying and honoring the Kohen, this gives Hashem the reason, the raison d'etre, to sanctify us. And I thought that was a beautiful explanation. So basically, in summary, the man who is privileged to be in the presence of Hashem must not defile himself, so he can maintain to be in that presence. And please notice the fascinating point that the Alshech had made already in the previous parasha, that whenever we're talking about God's holiness, we spell it Kadosh Kuf Daled Vav Shin, and whenever we talk about the holiness of man, whether it's Bnei Israel or Kohen, we don't have the Vav. The Vav is missing, so it's just Kuf Daled Shin, and that just explains to us that there is a difference between God's holiness and our holiness. It reminds me of a beautiful story that my rabbi of Hershkovitz, who's from Gateshead, came to visit us last month, and he says the story that a rabbi goes to a man and says, "Tell me, are you a Kohen?" And the guy says, "No." He says, "Well, why aren't you a Kohen?" He says, "Because my father's not a Kohen." "Yeah, but why is your father not a Kohen?" "Because his father was not a Kohen." And he goes on and on and on. And he says, "Yeah, but why did the very first ancestor not be a Kohen?" And the answer is because when he came to the golden calf, when Moshe says, who is for God, who is going to stand up for God, only the Levites stood up and presented themselves to do that work. And as a result of that, they earned the privilege of taking the priesthood from the Bechor, the firstborn, to their tribe. And within that, The Kohen obviously is the elevated part of the Levites as well. So my blessing to you is that sometimes in life God gives us opportunities. We are in the right place at the right time, in the right mode of mind, and we can see that something of holiness has to be done. And we look around and there's nobody there to do it. And the indication is that I need to do it. And I need to stand up and step up into that opportunity and embrace it. And as a result of that, I can tell you that when I've done that here in Tzfat, I have connected myself with the most incredible mentors and people and communities by stepping up when nobody else was there to do the work of God. So I bless you that even though we're not Kohanim, certainly I'm not a Kohen, if you're not a Kohen, that we should still be a light to the nations, a people of purity and morals, living the life of Torah as a way to demonstrate that a human being can elevate to a higher level than just the animalistic nature of it. Shabbat Shalom, see you next week.